This commenter says, I'm trying to feminize my voice, and every time I try, I feel my throat hurt or sort of tighten. I can't really describe it, but am I doing something wrong? So there are a few factors that can lead to a feeling of tightness in the throat while feminizing the voice. But the most common issue that I see is people who are putting in too much activation energy, or more simply, trying too hard. The voice is one of these tricky things where the point of diminishing returns can sneak up really quickly. And once you pass it, the more effort you put in, the more tension you can create around your instrument. So a question I like to ask my students who are trying really hard to achieve the result is, how would you do this exercise if it were easy? The mind is a very powerful thing, and the stories we tell ourselves have a huge impact on our behavior. If you approach your exercise with the idea in your mind that it is really hard to do, then you will put in an amount of effort that matches your perceived difficulty level. Try this. Breathe for a few seconds before your exercise and ask yourself, how would I approach this exercise if I were sure that it was easy to do? Did you get a different result? Let me know in the comments. A question I get asked all the time is, how did I become a trans voice teacher? My path toward this work was not at all linear, so let me tell you how it went. I started learning to sing in my teen years, and when I turned 20, I started teaching others how to sing as well. I taught singing for 10 years, and in that time, I got degrees in physics, jazz, and songwriting. In 2018, I made the decision that I wanted to focus on teaching singing to trans and/or disabled students because I identify as both, and my favorite teaching experiences have been with students who identify as one or the other or both. Because I was aware that these groups don't traditionally have a lot of disposable income for singing lessons, I created a scholarship program called the Right to Sing Award, where I raised money to be able to give free singing lessons to trans and/or disabled students. During the marketing of the Right to Sing Award, one of my Instagram ads caught the eye of the education coordinator at a trans youth group in Montreal called Project 10. They had recently held a trans voice workshop with a speech language pathologist who is cis and whose ideas about gender didn't align with those of the organization. They wanted a trans person to conduct the workshop, and they wondered if I could do it. I had never taught a trans voice workshop before, but the idea was so immediately exciting to me that I accepted to teach the workshop, and then I got to work teaching myself everything that I could learn about trans voice alteration. I read every available book and watched every video. I read every Reddit thread. Between the information I gathered and my own experience modifying my speaking voice for health reasons, I cobbled together my first trans voice workshop, which I called Trans Vocal Exploration. Things snowballed from there. Project 10 hired me again to teach the workshop in English and French and sent me private students whenever they had inquiries. Then other organizations hired me to teach workshops, and more private students showed up. And before I knew it, it was all I was doing. Now I sometimes get hired by speech language pathology programs to come and teach future SLPs about this field. If I've learned anything in my time in this field, it's that we need a lot more voices contributing to our shared knowledge, especially trans voices. That is why I created my teacher training program aimed at singing teachers who are like me, who started as singing teachers but want to pivot into the trans voice field and put their specialized knowledge to good use. The program is called Learn to Teach Trans Voice Alteration in 5 weeks, and I'm running the third cohort of this program in November. So if you're interested in getting involved in that and being a part of it, check out the link in my bio. I don't know what's going on this week, but I've had so many students come to me and say, Renee, I'm interested in taking your course or in taking private lessons with you, but I just don't believe that I can make a change with my voice. Like, sure, other people can, and I've seen that you have students who've had success with their voice, but not me. I couldn't do it. I'm different, or the exception. And I don't know who needs to hear this. Maybe you're one of those people, but you are not the exception. You are not special. There's not something about you that this won't work for you where it worked for other people. Every single student that I've ever had or ever seen started from the bottom of this work. They started at the beginning, just like you are starting right now. It's not unusual to feel like it's never going to happen for you. Everybody feels that way, but you're not the exception. You can control your voice. You can create a voice that you love. It just takes time and patience. I believe in you. Stick with it. You are not the exception, okay? You can do this just like everybody else who came before you. If you're working to feminize your voice, one characteristic you've probably heard about is resonance. And the way that we control resonance is by raising the larynx, making the vocal tract smaller to create a much cuter sound, a much more feminine sound. But recently I had a student who was really struggling to get any upward movement with her larynx. So I tried this exercise with her and it had some success. So let's see if it works for you. Basically, I want you to say ee-ah, ee-ah. So when you say E and ah, you can feel your mouth shape changing. Now, if you hold that on one pitch, E, ah, all you're doing is modifying resonance. So that's a really good start. We know you can modify the resonance of your voice. Now, let's do that same exercise, but we're going to do it now on A, ah, okay? Or rather, let's do it on A, ah, okay? So A, I, ah, and we can try it on A, ah, A, ah, A, ah. Okay, so we've managed to make some changes. Now let's try going from A to ah without moving the mouth so much. So before we were relying on A, ah, a big mouth shape change. But can we get that change without moving the mouth? Let's try it. So I don't know if you could tell, I got a little bit of movement from the larynx and a lot of movement from the tongue. So this can be a really good start to moving that larynx if you're not able to do it through other means. Give it a try and let me know in the comments if it worked for you.
How has it been since you finished taking the course, Learn to Teach Trans Voice Alteration in 5 weeks?
I was just thinking, I actually just taught lesson like right before this.
Nice.
And I was just thinking about how like well constructed your pedagogy was. Like, I feel like I don't know, like I just like transcribed what you said into my own notes. And then I was like, I feel like I have all of my tools there. Like, it's not, I don't know, it was very intuitive and like very like, it related to the anatomy of the voice. So I feel like everything was like very clear.
Yours was amazing. And I told you this in our sort of exit interview because it was very well organized, which is super important to me. I get real panicky when things are all over the place. And, you know, like I attended one where I think it was like a vocal anatomy workshop kind of thing. And it was quite literally just material read to us. And I'm going to be honest, I left early. But yours was just so organized. And I felt like, oddly enough, the test that you gave us was really what helped seal everything in. It kind of forced me to go back through my notes and really let rise to the top what was most important, what those sort of top tier takeaways should have been. And then our conversation afterwards was also really helpful because we could talk through the things that I had sort of missed in the test. And you just didn't get that. I've not had that in other trainings.
How did this training compare to your last training?
Yeah, so your approach was definitely much more structured. With like the PowerPoints and the handouts was very structured and very good for my brain because I need everything to be organized and I need everything to have pictures.
I was there for all of the classes, but I've been, every time I have like a little moment of like, you know, I'm looking at my notes and like, what was that? And like, now I can just go back and like listen to the thing and I can keep learning from the lessons that have already happened in time, you know?
Totally.
Oh, I was saying those were easy to go through because then I could like speed it up a little bit so I could like take notes.
Smart. Yes, of course. I didn't even think about that.
Like my biggest fear as a teacher is like stagnating and not, and I love to learn. And so, you know, and I mean, I was intimidated because I just wasn't sure. And we had discussed this. I mean, I feel like my job is sort of this cis hetero woman is to just like shut up and listen and learn. And, but you held a super open and really compassionate space. And so I felt like I could speak and ask questions and you made a really lovely, comfortable space. I was just floating after our first lunch break. I came wafting out. My husband's like, clearly it's going well.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. I want to know what your like vision of the future is for trans voice teachers. Like I have a vision. I want there to be more. I don't know. It's kind of an open-ended question, but I'm just curious as to what you want the future of this practice to look like?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, like, I want to be a part of it.
Yes.
I guess I can speak from my own experience of like singing and taking voice lessons and teaching voice lessons. I think that we talk a lot in singing about like finding the right teacher for you. I don't know, it's really personal, and there's like the vibe of the person and the personal relationship you have. That's one reason why it would be so nice for trans people to have like their pick of teachers, to say like, I tried a couple and this one really just spoke to me and we got along really well. And I think that would be the ideal, if there's just like a whole rainbow of choices of teachers.
Yes.
Yeah, like I absolutely agree that the more teachers there are, the more it's accessible, especially because like out of all things that are part of the trans experience, like this one doesn't need to be medicalized. And so just having that be so much more accessible seems like a really good idea, having different people who can do it, who like, yeah, that will look like you, or, have similar personalities or whatever, like people you click with, seems helpful. It's just such a beautiful field, and something that I wouldn't have thought of as a singer, as a singing teacher, but like it makes so much sense, even just as a singing teacher. Like if you have a student that shows up who's trans, like what do you do?
I mean, I've been teaching for over 20 years, and I'm leaning now toward recognizing where I really want to be of service. And I told you during our program, I think numerous times actually, that what you're teaching should be taught at the college level. It should be taught to voice majors, mandatory. It should also be mandatory in choral education programs. And what's happening, and I'm married to a choir director, is now he's getting non-binary kids and kids that are looking at even hormone replacement. And, he's trying to navigate for them in a world that has such gender biased languaging used around the voice. I want to be able to be useful to choral directors, and even offering like supplemental training for them in the summers and things, is to try to incorporate this as well.
So had you had experience in mixed groups of cis and trans people before, or was this one of your first experience? Like did you know any trans people before?
No, not really. And that's makes me sad, because we live in a pretty, again, the Midwest is, it was actually really nice, because, and again, I learned so much because you had such a great group of people from different backgrounds, and you had somebody who could speak very directly to their experience with being on T, because he was on it, going through puberty, and the good and the not so good. And that was really, really helpful. And I mean, this, and this is why you brought in all of the guests, so that we could actually watch and experience what somebody is going through and how different the experience is for each person. So yeah, it was incredibly helpful to have sort of the diverse spectrum of folks that you had. I feel like I learned a lot from that experience as well.
I'm really glad. What was your experience being in like a mixed group of cis and trans people? How was that for you?
It was very good. I was very impressed by how it was handled. Just because in my workspace, I'm used to like exclusively working with trans people. So sometimes I forget that like cis people don't know everything that we know. So
I think shocking and fascinating, right?
I think it was handled very well, and I felt very comfortable in that space.
I'm glad. I'm really glad to hear that.
If there's any voice teachers on here who are considering it, I just think this is a must-have in your toolbox. It just really is. We should not be without this information.
Thanks, Cassie.
Obviously, Renée is so incredibly capable and very, very academic without being pretentious. That's quite a balance to strike in here.
Thank you. I appreciate that.